Some stories break you, some heal you. But here at My 90s Love Story, we're here to fill your heart. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. For 5 long years, I stayed at Everett Crawford's side. In all that time, I wasn't only his secretary, his assistant, his housekeeper. I was his lover, too. I first attached myself to him when I was 22. And now, at 27, the best years a young woman gets have slipped by in his shadow. I watched the way his friends looked at me change over time. At first, they were distant, indifferent, like I was a stranger who had wandered into the wrong room. But as the years passed, my presence became so ordinary to them that they started politely to call me sister-in-law. That little shift wasn't just a sign that I had become part of his world. It was proof of how long I had clung to him. Sometimes I asked myself whether I had some special pull. Because if I didn't, how could a woman like me stay so long beside a man as high and unreachable as Everett Crawford? The years, and all the different roles I played in his life, made me turn the question over and over. Did my being there actually mean anything to him at all? I wasn't flattering myself, but from the very first time we met, I had the feeling that Everett had looked at me more than once, quietly, carefully, with real attention. At the end of my final year of college, my grades were strong enough to earn me a place at JK Group. It was a turning point, the start of a whole new chapter. One joined the company to a chorus of congratulations and no small number of envious stares. JK Group's headquarters filled a grand 32-story tower right in the center of the city, and the secretarial department was not some tiny team. There were more than a dozen of us, and every one of us served a single man, the chairman. I was one of the secretaries who made the cut. Each day I handled important tasks and supported the chairman directly, which demanded not only precision and professionalism, but a certain sharpness and tact in every situation. Landing there was a big step for my career and a real test, a rare chance to prove what I was worth. Our office sat on the 31st floor, the closest one to the chairman's office on the 32nd. In my first 3 months, I met him only twice. The first time I carried a stack of documents into his office for his signature, and I couldn't keep my heart from pounding. His office was huge and beautifully furnished, every piece of it tasteful and expensive. I didn't dare look around. I just kept my eyes down and tried to look calm, standing at the edge of his desk, waiting for him to notice me and sign. Even with my head lowered, I could feel his gaze slide over me as he signed. A heavy, tense pressure settled on me every time his eyes moved. When he handed the documents back, it was as if his attention wrapped all the way around me, and it followed me out the door. Turning to leave, I felt eyes on my back, like 1,000 little needles pressing into my spine. And only once I was out of the room did the feeling fade and let me breathe again. It was the first time I had ever stood face to face with the top man in the whole company, so the nerves were unavoidable. My palms were slick with sweat. Still, I told myself his searching look was probably nothing but a trick of my own anxiety. A man like that, young, brilliant, worth billions. A giant of the business world striking to look at. A man that even famous actresses openly said they wanted to marry. What kind of beauty had he not already seen? Why would he look at me? Maybe I was just new, so he glanced a few extra times. Or maybe I dressed too plainly and embarrassed the company. I started doubting myself. That doubt came from knowing myself too well. Even as a little girl, I understood what I looked like. I knew that at best, I could be called pretty in a very ordinary way. Back in middle school, I was lucky enough to be voted class beauty, but that wasn't because of any dazzling looks. My class was packed with top students, not with the prettiest faces. In a room like that, looks were not what people measured. So the praise from classmates and teachers was never proof of some stunning beauty. It was just a choice made in a particular little pond. It made me wonder whether Everett's attention was some kind of mistake, or something that had nothing to do with how I looked. And yet, the second time I met the chairman, I felt his eyes on me again. That day, I was waiting for the elevator to go down. When the doors opened, there he stood, that tall, cold-faced CEO, with his assistant beside him. For some reason, he wasn't using his private elevator, but the ordinary one the staff took. I froze. The thought of being shut into that little box with him made my legs refuse to move. But if I didn't get in, wouldn't that look strange? While I hesitated, he spoke. I gritted my teeth and stepped inside. For the 2 minutes it took to reach the bottom, I felt that gaze brush over me again. There and not there. This time I was certain. It wasn't in my head. The chairman really was looking at me, and my heart thudded in my chest. I never imagined the relationship between Everett and me would move as fast as it did. In more than 3 months at the company, we had crossed paths exactly twice. And then we were together. It happened the day I learned my grandmother had fallen gravely ill and been rushed to the hospital. It felt like the sky had caved in. Shaking, I filed for leave on my computer and sent my resignation up to my superiors at the same time. While I waited for the approvals, I ran out to the stairwell, sank down, and sobbed. When I was still in grade school, my whole life was shattered. My parents died suddenly, and after that my grandmother became the only one who raised me and cared for me. Our life was hard, but she always gave me the very best of whatever little she had. Her love and her sacrifices made me feel, in spite of everything, like the luckiest and happiest girl alive. When I got into college and started working at a big company, I was overflowing with hope for the future. I felt like I was finally on the right road, like all my effort was being repaid. I pictured a bright road ahead, one where the hardships of the past would no longer stand in the way. In those days, I always dreamed of a better life for my grandmother, the woman who taught me patience and unconditional love. My plan was to hold my job steady a while longer, rent a nicer place, and bring her to live with me so she could enjoy some peaceful, happy years after all she'd been through. I dreamed of the day we would live somewhere comfortable and safe, where she could finally feel calm and content. That was my greatest motivation, a deep, aching wish to repay the woman who had stood beside me through all the hard years. Later I would work and save, put down a deposit on a small house, and let her rest easy in her old age. While I was busy dreaming of that bright future, it never crossed my mind that my healthy grandmother could suddenly collapse. Relatives back home told me her condition was serious. She needed surgery, and after that, ongoing treatment. I hated to give up such a good, well-paid job, but she needed someone to take care of her. My plans for the future were ending before they had even begun. And worse than anything, I had no money. Her operation would cost a great deal, and the treatment after would be expensive too. I had just graduated with 2 empty hands. It was as if a mountain had come crashing down on me, with no warning, pinning me to the ground while I struggled in despair. And on top of that, I was drowning in guilt. It was my own uselessness. When my grandmother needed me most, I couldn't come up with the money for her surgery, and I didn't know how I would care for her afterward. The pain rolled over me like a tide, until I couldn't breathe. Helpless and stunned, I cried my heart out in that empty corner of the stairwell. That was the moment Everett Crawford appeared. Even now, I remember exactly what he said. "I received your resignation. I came by the office and asked your coworkers what happened. Your grandmother can be moved to the best hospital in the city. I'll cover the cost of the surgery and everything after. You just have to agree to one condition." He was standing on the stairs with the light behind him, so I couldn't see his face clearly, and his voice was cool and detached. But I felt like a person who had been sinking under water and was suddenly pulled up into fresh air, gulping it into my lungs. I didn't even have time to think through what he'd said before I blurted out, "Yes, okay." In that moment, I had only one thought. My grandmother would be saved. The man in front of me was my chance, and I had to seize him with both hands. He was my savior. It wasn't until she was moved to the best hospital, settled into the best room, and her surgery was all arranged, that I came back to my senses and thought to ask him what the condition was. He was sitting in his car, relaxed, and he glanced at me and said slowly, "Be my mistress." His voice was low and rich, and there was no joke in it at all. My first reaction was to think I was imagining things. Dazed, I stammered. "What did you say? Mr. Crawford, could you say that again? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you clearly." I honestly wondered if my ears were playing tricks on me, and I think he almost smiled. "You heard me right. I said, 'Be my mistress.'" His voice left no room for doubt. I was stunned. But to be honest, once it sank in, I didn't feel insulted, not at all. In TV dramas, the male lead takes advantage of the heroine's desperation, uses money to force her, and the heroine feels humiliated and hates him, and the two of them begin some tortured secret romance. Maybe because I wasn't the heroine of anything, I felt none of that. My very first feeling was, who am I to be offended? This was Everett Crawford, young, handsome, worth billions, a man so many women wept and screamed over, the man the whole country called the perfect husband. He had already helped me so much. He was my benefactor. Without him, I would still be back in my hometown, begging relatives for money to pay for my grandmother's surgery. I was so grateful to him that when he asked me to be his mistress, I felt no anger. If anything, I felt like I was the one coming out ahead. The surgery and the treatment after it were a sum of money so enormous I could never have shouldered it, a sum large enough to push a girl with nothing to the very edge of ruin. And on top of that, Everett was simply too beautiful. His build could rival a runway model's. Even if he hadn't spent a cent to help me, even if he had been poor, loving him would have felt like reaching far above my station. So in this arrangement, I always kept my place perfectly clear. Just as he'd said from the start, I was only a mistress, not a girlfriend, not an equal partner, just someone he shared a bed with. And I didn't feel one drop of self-pity or resentment about it. I only felt gratitude. Thanks to the top surgeons, my grandmother's operation was a complete success. Everett even hired a private nurse to look after her, so I didn't have to quit. I could keep earning and still be there for her. The hospital wasn't far from where I worked, which made it easy to visit her after hours every day. One evening, just as I was leaving the hospital, I got a call from Everett. "Do you have time to come over?" he asked. The thing I'd known was coming had finally come. I'd braced myself for it, but I still couldn't stop the nerves. I couldn't even name what I felt. Tension, dread, a flutter of excitement. I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said, and stood waiting for his driver to pick me up. That night he'd had a little to drink. There was a faint smell of alcohol on him, but it wasn't unpleasant. When we fell into bed together, my whole body was trembling. He was very gentle. He knew it was my first time, so he kept soothing me, kept calming me, patient and considerate, and I lost myself in the warmth of his breath. The next morning I fumbled with his tie, trying clumsily to knot it for him, but I couldn't make it look right. Above my head, I heard him laugh softly. "Let me," he said, and did it himself. Once he was dressed, he asked if I wanted breakfast with him. I shook my head in a flustered rush, and he had the driver take me to work. 2 days later, I brought him documents to sign, and he was as stern and unreadable as ever. I smiled politely, too. "Thank you, Mr. Crawford." After that, it seemed Everett had developed a fresh sort of interest in me. For over a month straight, every other day, he'd send the driver to bring me back to his place. The nights were tangled and endless, and then for 3 days, it was as if nothing had happened at all. That was how we were together. Sometimes, thinking back, it felt unreal. that the head of the whole company, cold and untouchable as a flower on a high mountain peak, kept up a private, intimate thing with someone like me. It was almost magical, too strange to be true. One Friday night he came for me, and the next day was a day off. In the morning, I still woke up meaning to leave on time, but he pulled me back into his arms. "Don't go." His eyes were still closed, his voice thick and slurred with sleep. Nothing like the sharp voice he used at the office. For just a heartbeat, I forgot who he was. I lay back down and stayed there with him, drifting, until I slipped back to sleep. When I woke, there was no one beside me. I sat up in a panic and hurried downstairs. He was in the dining room, eating. When he saw me, he said easily, "You're up. Come eat." In that instant, I let myself fall into a foolish fantasy that this was my home, that a husband was calling his wife to breakfast, the most ordinary thing in the world, and yet strangely beautiful. But I sobered up fast and reminded myself exactly what I was. After that, I was so shy at the table that my hands and feet curled up on themselves. When we'd finished eating, Everett leaned back on the sofa, unhurried, reading the paper. He waved me over to sit beside him. Even after everything we'd done in the dark, this was the first time I'd been near him in daylight, both of us clear-headed, and I couldn't help feeling clumsy and tense. When the part-time housekeeper arrived, I seized the chance to stand and say I'd go help her, and the second I got into the kitchen, the pressure lifted and my whole body relaxed. That afternoon, I made crucian carp soup. The broth came out a beautiful milky white and smelled wonderful. It was my specialty, something I'd learned from my grandmother. I'd known how to cook since middle school, and over the years, I'd only gotten better. Everett was so impressed, he ate 2 bowls and praised me for being gentle and good, a real homemaker. It was the first time anyone had ever complimented me that way. The words he used were a little old-fashioned, but I couldn't help feeling glad. After that, he often picked me up on weekends, saying he wanted the fish soup I made. Later still, he told me to give up my rented room and move into his apartment in the center of the city, and he began staying over more and more. As time went on and we spent more of it together, he and I looked more and more like an ordinary couple living under one roof. No one at the company knew about our private relationship, but he did bring me to parties with his friends. In their eyes, I was just some ordinary female friend of his, and no one paid me any attention. I was the kind of guest who could stand there in plain sight, large as life and still be invisible, not even worth a passing glance. They played cards, tried their hand at archery, went riding, chatted and laughed, and I turned myself into a piece of the air. That bone-deep contempt could give a person a real inferiority complex. At first, it did bother me, but luckily I've always had a steady mind, and I quickly made my peace with it. I was never from his world to begin with. His circle was one I would never be able to enter. The only thing was, as I kept turning up more and more, 1 month, 2 months, 1 year, 2 years, I stayed long enough to break his record for the woman who lasted longest at his side. His friends seemed surprised. Maybe they sensed I was different, so now and then they'd steal a look at me. When a childhood friend of his found out I worked at the company, he was startled, then laughed and said, "So you've started grazing right by your own nest." Everett only smiled and didn't answer. That friend knew some of the shareholders, and word spread, so eventually a few of the company's top executives learned about us. I quietly told myself it was a mercy only a handful of them knew. If my coworkers had found out about my relationship with him, then no matter how thick my skin, I could never have kept working under everyone's prying eyes. I worked hard, and I pushed myself. Part of me wanted to climb on my own merit, and part of me held a vague, hopeful wish that he would see how good I was. Yes, I had fallen for him. People are drawn to strength, and by every measure he was the most outstanding man I had ever known. Perfect looks, a brilliant career, and on top of that, he had carried me through the hardest stretch of my life. With a man like that beside you, who could keep her heart from stirring? But I knew this feeling could never lead anywhere. All I could do was bury it and make sure he never caught the faintest glimpse of it. Living with him, I came to understand his temperament and his tastes. He was cold, he liked quiet, and he couldn't stand a woman who clung too much. The moment someone showed him too much affection, he'd find her tiresome and cut her loose without a second thought. That, I think, was why the women he'd been with before never lasted. A man that extraordinary makes it hard for a woman not to lose her head, and the moment she did, he'd toss her out fast, without a shred of reluctance. His friends teased him for being heartless, but that same heartless man kept me by his side for a very long time. In the 3rd year with him, I earned a promotion, on my own merit, to his special assistant. From then on, I didn't just handle his work, I looked after his whole daily life. By day, I managed his affairs. By night, I slept beside him. You could say every corner of his life carried some trace of me. We were together morning and night, like a shadow to his body. Even his friends began to take me seriously. When they couldn't reach him, they'd call me, and when they met me alone, they'd greet me politely as sister-in-law. At work, I did everything I could to make it perfect. Whatever he asked for, whatever document was to reach his hands, I reviewed and revised again and again to be sure there wasn't a single flaw before I handed it over. In his daily life, I cared for him down to the smallest detail, from his food to his clothes. I studied what he liked and chose things to match. And I never once made a mistake, never once gave him cause to say he was unhappy. Slowly, he came to depend on me. Once, he went on a business trip at the very time I'd taken leave to be at the hospital with my grandmother, so I didn't go along. Around 2 in the morning on the second night, another assistant who traveled with him called me, desperate for help. He said the chairman was furious. I bought a plane ticket at once and flew through the night to reach them. It turned out the assistant had sent the organizer's documents straight up to the chairman without filtering, editing, or arranging them the way Everett liked to read. The chairman had hurled the whole stack across the floor and torn into the poor man. Really, it wasn't his fault. Ever since I'd taken over as special assistant, on every trip Everett brought me along, and everything that reached his hands passed through mine first, he'd simply grown used to everything being just right. This assistant, on his first trip with the chairman, hadn't known to be that careful. After I took the work back over, Everett never lost his temper again. The night before we flew home, he pulled me into his arms and sighed. "Looks like from now on I'll have to bring you everywhere." I buried my face in his chest and couldn't stop the corners of my mouth from curving up. Those words were the highest praise I could imagine. My effort hadn't been wasted. He'd felt it. Maybe it was that one sentence from Everett that made me giddy enough to forget my limits. Maybe it was that in 3 years he had never once been cold to me or spoken to me too sharply. Or maybe it's just that a woman who is spoiled grows proud almost by instinct. In that 3rd year, I let myself relax. Now and then I'd act a little playful with him, though I always kept a sense of measure. From everything I understood about him, those small things fell within what he could accept. Only once, I think I went too far. That day was my 25th birthday. Of course he didn't know. In all our time together, he had never once asked when my birthday was, and I never brought it up. He didn't care for anything with that kind of sentiment. He didn't even mark his own. But a girl always has a few of those soft, silly wishes. That day, I wanted so badly for him to spend my birthday with me. In the evening, I cooked several dishes he liked, and with my heart in my throat, I called him. In 3 years, I had never once broken my rule. Outside of work, I never called him for anything personal, not a single time. For the first time, I asked him, "Will you be coming home tonight?" He went quiet for a moment, then said, "No." And in that moment, I couldn't rein myself in. I let myself be coaxing and said, "Come home. I made some good dishes. I want to eat with you." It was the first thing I had ever asked of him since we'd been together. Everything he had ever given me, arranging the hospital for my grandmother, the clothes, the shoes, the gifts, he had always offered on his own. I had never once asked for anything. The words were barely out before I regretted them, because I heard from the other end a soft, mocking laugh. That instant was like a basin of ice water poured straight into my chest, cold all the way to my heart. That little sneer, and the short silence behind it, was an enormous humiliation, laughing at me for not knowing my own weight. He hung up. I wrapped my arms around myself, curled into the sofa, and shook all over. Lena Hartwell, I thought, have these easy days made you forget who you are? I slapped myself twice, hard, and came fully back to my senses. After that day, Everett stopped coming. He didn't tell me to go, and I didn't dare move out on my own, so I stayed in that big, empty apartment of his. Before long, a girlfriend appeared at his side, a fairly well-known young starlet. Before me, the girlfriends beside Everett had changed fast. But after I came along, no other woman had appeared. Now I understood. He was telling me, with actions instead of words, that though he'd kept me around a long time, I was no different from any of the other girls. The truth was, I'd already understood it. That mocking laugh of his had ground my last shred of pride into dust, and I no longer let myself entertain a single foolish dream. As his special assistant, I had to handle everything, from his work to his personal life. One day, Everett told me to order that young starlet a lavish party gown and go along with her to the fitting. I was only a little surprised before I nodded, the calm, professional smile still on my lips, and got it done quickly. Watching that girl pull him close by the arm and lean in to talk to him, I could still smile at her, then turn and walk down a long, long hallway into the bathroom. Standing there, I finally realized my face was covered in tears. I'd always thought of myself as calm and rational, but I couldn't make myself indifferent. My heart genuinely hurt, and that pain was too real to lie to myself about. Maybe because I understood our future so clearly and didn't dare hope for anything, the wound healed fast. After that, the women at Everett's side kept changing. I bought gifts for those girls, booked restaurants for their dates, arranged their travel tickets. And in the end, I found that my heart no longer stirred at all, watching him be tender with one girl after another. After all that inner torment, I got through it, gritting my teeth and waiting for my heart to mend. I kept warning myself. Everett was my boss, my leader, my benefactor. But he could never, ever be the man I loved. Yes, I was still grateful to him. As long as my grandmother stayed in the best hospital, taking the best medicine, he was my benefactor. One day, Everett told me to transfer a car into the name of a girlfriend he'd just broken up with. On my way back, I got a call from my grandmother. Ever since her surgery, she'd spent most of her time unconscious, rarely awake. I'd left a phone with her, but she had never once called me, because her mind was mostly foggy and confused. This was the first time she'd ever called. She said so much, asking how my work was going, worrying that her hospital stay had cost too much, worrying she'd become a burden to me. It was rambling and out of order, the same things over and over, but I cried from sheer joy because it meant her mind was clearing, that she was getting better. After I hung up, I covered my mouth and crouched right there in the parking garage and wept. Suddenly, a pair of legs appeared in front of me. I looked up. Everett was standing there. Startled, I wiped my tears and reported to him, respectful and composed. "Mr. Crawford, the car has been transferred to her and the money's been sent to her account." He nodded and walked away. That night, after more than 4 months, Everett walked into the home I was living in again. Seeing him come through the door, I fought down my surprise and handed him a pair of slippers as if nothing had ever happened. "You're back," I said with a smile. Mm. He was as sparing with his words as ever. That night he was more feverish than he had ever been, wearing me out until nearly dawn before finally holding me tight. And just like that, we were together again. Neither of us brought up what had happened. We simply went back to the way we'd lived before, as if those 4 months apart and all the awkwardness that came before them had never happened at all. From then on, I kept a constant guard on myself and never said a single improper word. We lived together in harmony. Sometimes, when he had a day off, he'd take me abroad to a resort. Once I came back from soaking in a hot spring to find him lying on his side on a lounge chair in a bathrobe, his hair still damp, drops of water sliding down his face, a picture beautiful enough to undo you. Honestly, if he had been my boyfriend, I would have thrown myself into his arms and kissed him. But he wasn't. I pressed the feeling down, picked up a towel, and crossed the room step by step to gently dry his hair. Living together so long, I understood his nature more and more. The truth is, being with him was simple, as long as you treated him as a partner in an arrangement and not a boyfriend to love. But that, sadly, is very hard to do. At least none of his girlfriends had ever managed it. Facing a man like that and not losing your heart, not falling into being a real girlfriend, is just too difficult. And so I stayed at his side another 2 years. Not counting those 4 months, we had been together nearly 5 years. By then, I knew my place and never overestimated myself. Never imagined I was anything special to him. Deep down, I understood it clearly. The reason he kept me around wasn't because he felt anything for me. It was because I was obedient. I listened. I didn't cling, and I knew how to get things done. He simply couldn't be bothered with the trouble of other women. His mind was on his work, and for him, having one woman at his side was enough. Who she was didn't matter. As I got older, I knew that sooner or later a day would come when I'd leave him. I just never expected it to come so suddenly. That day, we ate dinner as usual. Once the housekeeper had washed the dishes and gone home, he sat on the sofa and waved me over. "I've made arrangements at the hospital. Your grandmother will keep getting the best treatment in that same room. Everything stays the same. Don't worry." He said it with no warning at all. I nodded, dazed. "This apartment, I've transferred it to your name. Tomorrow you'll receive a sum of money in your account. As for work, hand in your resignation tomorrow. I can introduce you to a friend's company. If you have any other requests, just say so, and I'll do my best to grant them." "Yes," I said, lowering my head. "I don't have any requests." And just like that, our 5 years came to an end. I didn't know the reason, and I had no right to ask. From beginning to end, he was the one who decided everything between us. Very soon, I understood why. The next day, I went to the office and turned in my resignation. Because I had the chairman's special approval, I was allowed to leave that same day, without serving the month's notice the rules required. Once I'd packed my things at the office, I went back to the house he'd given me. My phone chimed with a message. A large sum had come in. I laughed at myself. He was still fairly satisfied with me. At the very least, the money he'd given me was more generous than what he'd given the other girls. Then, all at once, I didn't know what to do. The future was a blank fog. I took out my phone and scrolled the news, and I saw a story saying he was about to be married. The bride's family was every bit his equal. She was the heiress of a group that owned a famous nationwide supermarket chain, a graduate of a prestigious school, and stunningly beautiful. Even I had to admit they made a striking pair. The internet was flooded with photos of them holding hands, a faint smile on his lips. anyone could see he was pleased with this marriage. In the comments, some people offered congratulations, some wept over losing him, and some, jealous, claimed she'd had plastic surgery. I smiled and put the phone down. No matter what, in my heart, I wished him well. After all, he had helped me a great deal, and he had never made things hard for me. I was simply the one who hadn't known her own limits and had gone and loved him. That he didn't love me back was only natural. Looking back now, those 5 years beside him seem like nothing but one long dream, a wild, impossible dream. Sometimes I doubt I was ever really with that perfect husband the whole country adored. But dreams end, and it was time for me to come back to reality. Life always has to go on. I sold the house he'd given me and used the money to buy a villa on the outskirts of the city. I turned the backyard into neat little plots and started growing vegetables, filming as I went. My plan for the future was to build a little media channel, documenting how I grew my vegetables and cooked. I do it slowly, and it didn't matter if I never got famous or made money. For now, at least, I wasn't short on cash, and I had the time for it. Everett had offered to introduce me to his friend's company, but I didn't want to go. If we were going to be separate, then I wanted to be completely free of his world, with nothing more between us. I thought that in this life, Everett and I would never meet again. But not long after, he showed up in front of me. Thinking back on what he said, I can still feel how bewildered I was. He told me his fiancée knew I existed. Even though he and I had separated, she wasn't at ease. She demanded that I get married first, and only then would she agree to marry him. He told me he wanted me to be married within 1 month. It was an absurd request, truly excessive, but I wasn't angry. I only asked him whether, once I was married, I would no longer owe him anything, and everything between us could be wiped clean. All those years, because my grandmother had been in the hospital, I'd been in Everett's debt. But in every way, I fell far short of him. There was nothing I could do to help him. Sometimes I thought that if only, like in a TV drama, a car came speeding toward him, I could shove him out of the way and take the hit with my own body and repay him with the one thing I had. Owing a debt you can never repay is a miserable feeling. And now, I thought, at last, there was a chance to repay him. Marriage is a lifelong thing, and sacrificing my own was a very great price to pay. Everett said he had already chosen the man for me to marry. It was someone who'd once had dealings with him, a man of trustworthy character. After a while, when I wanted a divorce, he was sure the man wouldn't give me any trouble. I agreed. The man Everett introduced me to was named Dean Foster. He was my age, dignified in appearance, and tall. Dean's father had once been Everett's driver. The man's wife had an affair, and when he went to confront the other man, he was beaten to death. Dean was barely an adult then, still in school. Wanting to win justice for his father, he dropped out and went looking for anyone with connections who might help. But a young man with no money and no power was no match. The killer hired a very good lawyer who framed it all as self-defense, and the man didn't even face legal consequences. Then Dean came to Everett. At the time, Everett had only just taken over the company, but he had the family standing and the ability, and he quickly got the man thrown in prison. Dean told Everett he owed him a debt, and that from then on, whatever came, if it was something he could do, he would help without hesitation. He was a man of loyalty and honor, someone you could trust, Everett told me. On top of that, he was a construction contractor. In money and in standing, he was well above me, so he'd have no reason to take advantage of me. I met Dean. He had a rough, streetwise air about him, but his eyes were clear and honest. He seemed like a man you could trust, and besides, I trusted Everett's judgment, so I figured Dean's character had to be sound. A week later, Dean and I went and registered our marriage. Everett's fiancée may have heard I'd gotten married. Or maybe she simply couldn't be bothered with a small figure like me, because she never came looking for me. 2 months later, Everett's wedding of the century was covered by every major outlet. I saw a wedding photo that some guest had leaked, the bride and groom exchanging rings, both of them smiling. I had never seen him smile so easily. Good, I thought. It seemed he was very pleased with his bride and his wedding. As long as he was happy, everything I'd done was worth it. From now on, we truly would never meet again. I'm not someone who wears her feelings on the outside. Everything I felt for Everett, from the first stirring of my heart to the final wound, to forcing myself to give it all up, was mine alone to carry. In love, I've always been the one who pays. To love someone with everything I have for that person, I do it willingly, gladly, and I even feel happy doing it. I thought that in this relationship that led nowhere, I had spent every last drop of myself, and that I would probably never give so much for anyone again. I thought I would never let my heart move for another person. But then I met Dean, and being with Dean was something I never saw coming. Between the two of us, he was the one who gave more. I enjoyed the things he did for me, and let myself receive his care. Living with him, I could feel clearly, my cold heart being warmed a little at a time until it slowly came back to life. So this, it turned out, was what it felt like to be sheltered by someone. It's the kind of thing that pulls a person under and holds them there. At first, I treated Dean like a housemate. We shared a house, but not a room. We'd agreed we would divorce after a year, and I was polite and formal with him. I loved to cook, and I made all 3 meals a day myself. I couldn't finish it all alone, and throwing food out felt wasteful. So I invited Dean to eat with me. He got so spoiled by it that he refused to eat out anymore. At first, we made small talk here and there, but the conversations grew longer over time. Dean told me he'd never planned to marry. As a boy, he had watched his mother carry on affairs and bring different men home, and it had left him with a deep aversion to women. But because he owed Everett a debt, when Everett needed his help, he'd agreed without a moment's hesitation. He was going to live alone his whole life anyway, so one fake marriage wouldn't change a thing about it. As the 1-year mark drew near, I suggested we go handle the divorce. Dean, very seriously, asked to sit down and talk. He said his view of marriage and of women had changed. He asked whether I could give him a chance, a real relationship with him. He tried to look calm, but he couldn't hide the nervous worry in his eyes. All at once, I found this man rather endearing. After a year of living together, with the time to separate almost upon us, I had actually predicted his reaction, because without even realizing it, I had grown attached too, unwilling to part. One didn't want us to just end like that, and I didn't want to leave myself with regret. I nodded. Okay. Dean was the complete opposite of Everett, and unlike anyone I dealt with in my old working life. His hair was always cut short and never fussed over. He never wore a suit and tie. In summer, it was shorts, a tank top, and flip-flops, and in winter, ordinary everyday clothes or a tracksuit. He didn't care for Western food or wine. What he loved most was grilled skewers and beer. His voice was loud, his laugh hearty, and when his favorite team lost, he'd curse a few times. He was easygoing and a little rough around the edges, but at the same time he was attentive and patient. He was always out in the vegetable garden with a hoe in his hand, taking on the heavy jobs like hauling fertilizer whenever I needed it. Once, when a man in the neighborhood harassed me, Dean found out and made a formal complaint, pushing it until the man was fired, and then he hauled him over to apologize to me in person. When my grandmother passed, he ran back and forth handling all the duties that fall to family, and carried her ashes with his own hands. He was there for me the whole time as I saw her off, keeping me company in my deepest grief. He knew about my past, but it didn't bother him. He said he had no wish to dig into it. After a year of living with me, he knew what kind of person I was, and he trusted only his own judgment. His feelings were plain and simple, like a fire circling around me, but always with restraint, never burning me. We lived like husband and wife for a year, and the whole time he was the one who warmed me, comforted me, forgave me. That feeling of being cared for was almost impossible to resist, and I sank right into it. The rest of a life is such a long road. I was lucky, so lucky, to find someone whose hand I could hold the whole way. Dean and I didn't go through with the divorce. We kept living under one roof, but now as a couple. Even though Everett and I had been together 5 years, ours had never been an ordinary romance. And Dean had never loved anyone before either. Two people nearly 30 with no experience being in love. We copied what other couples did, going on dates, traveling, talking, curling up on the sofa to watch movies. After a year and a half together, we were both certain we were ready to accept each other as partners for the rest of our lives. Since we were already legally married, it saved us a step. We just let things follow their natural course. At my insistence, we didn't hold a wedding. Instead, we went traveling and counted that as having gone through the whole wedding. Sometime later, news of Everett appeared online again. He had his arm around the waist of a rising film star as they walked into a hotel. The photo led the entertainment sections of all the big magazines, and the headlines all read the same, that the wedding of the century was already flashing warning lights, that a famous star had become the other woman. I turned on the TV just as this story was airing, and, embarrassed, I switched it off. The room went very quiet. Dean looked at me and, hesitating, asked, "Should we leave this city?" I thought for a moment and asked him, "What about your work?" "I'm a contractor. I can make a living anywhere," he said, completely unbothered. This was the city where Everett lived. I understood that in his own way, Dean had noticed and did mind. And if he could walk away from the solid career he'd built here, determined to change, to start over somewhere new, well, I had already decided to spend the rest of my life with him. So what was there to hesitate over? My vegetable garden channel had millions of followers by then. But the great thing about this kind of work is how flexible it is. Moving somewhere else wouldn't affect it at all. We spent a few months settling everything, the house, the jobs, and then we moved to my old hometown. It's a place with beautiful scenery and a slow, unhurried pace, made for an easy, wandering life. I was getting older, I had someone I loved, and the rest of my life could just be spent quietly enjoying it. That was more than enough. Now, here's how it looked from Everett's side. These days, more and more, I find myself remembering the years with Lena Hartwell. Every time I close my eyes, my mind fills with her. The first time I saw her was in the ground floor lobby of the company. In the main lobby, there was a reception room walled in floor-to-ceiling glass. From inside, you could see everything outside, but from the outside, no one could see in. I was sitting on the sofa in that room, watching the crowd flow past. In the middle of the lobby, there was a little display of flowers and plants, and one small pot had been knocked crooked by someone, spoiling what had been a perfectly arranged little scene. It looked flawed, out of place. It was the end of the workday, and everyone was rushing to get out. She was the only one who stopped, moved the crooked pot back to its proper spot, and set it right. In a 32-story building with thousands of people streaming through, she was the only one willing to stop for one small flower pot. In that moment, I knew she had to be a good employee. Careful, patient, with a sense of responsibility. The day she brought documents up for my signature, I recognized her at once, but she seemed so nervous, keeping her head down the whole time. I glanced at her idly, and only when I looked closer did I realize she fit my taste. I've never liked beauty that's too dazzling or too sharp. I leaned toward gentler, more refined faces, and her looks, her figure, the lines of her face were all just right, exactly the kind I like. Still, At the time, I only thought it in passing and had no intentions. All my friends know I don't graze right by my own nest. But when I received her resignation, I couldn't sit still. I went down to the secretary's office to ask what had happened, and I saw her on the stairs, crying so bitterly, her face soaked with tears, her makeup smeared. And yet she wasn't ugly at all. Quite the opposite. There was a fragile quality to her that made a man want to protect her, to pull her into his arms. I'm not someone who wavers. When I want something, I act. One told her my condition, and she agreed. Only after we'd lived together did I discover that her personality suited me too. She threw herself into her work, patient and meticulous, and she could always do whatever I asked well. Even something as simple as meeting minutes, the other secretaries would turn in with some flaw or another, but hers never had a single error. She was the most suitable assistant I could have asked for, and I was very pleased with what she could do. In private matters, she was the calmest and most sensible of them all. She never put on airs, never made trouble. Of all the lovers who had ever been at my side, she was the woman I was most content with. Being with her, I felt completely at ease, in body and in mind, and I grew somewhat addicted to that feeling. One day it struck me that we had been together 3 years, a length of time I could hardly believe. None of the women before her had ever managed to stay by my side more than 2 months. Meet with them a few times, and their flaws would surface: arrogant, greedy, hypocritical, clumsy, and I'd tire of them fast, unwilling to look at them even once more. But Lena never once gave me that feeling. Being with her was restful. The days slipped by so quickly, and even the friends around me couldn't believe I could keep a girl at my side that long. In truth, I understood that she managed it partly because of her nature, clear-headed, rational, kind, content with what she had, never playing scheming little games, and partly because she was clever enough to feel out what I liked, to know what pleased me and what I couldn't stand. Only once did she seem to lose her sense of measure. That was the day she first called me about something personal, wanting me to come home and eat dinner with her. At the time, I was playing chess with my grandfather. Hearing her make that timid little request, an image of the women from before suddenly rose up in my mind, their faces layering over one another. Just as I thought, a woman comes to lean on a man's indulgence and turns arrogant, losing sight of who she really is. Lena, I decided, was no different. I stopped seeking her out and started changing the women at my side. At the time, I hadn't thought it through, whether I should end our relationship or let it run a while longer before she left. It was the first time I'd ever hesitated over a woman. She watched me be tender with other girls, even arranged my dates and bought their gifts with her own hands, and her eyes couldn't hide the pain and the endurance in them. I made myself ignore the strange feeling in my chest and told myself I was doing this so she would remember it for a long time. Only long after she and I had parted did I finally realize what that strange feeling was. It was reluctance. Being unwilling to let a girl go is the beginning of falling for her. Sadly, back then, I was too proud and too full of myself to see it. In the parking garage, I saw her crouched on the ground crying. And even then, she wiped away her tears and reported to me respectfully the tasks I'd given her to handle. So this was what she'd been crying over. So making her deal with those other girls had grieved her that deeply, more than I'd ever imagined. And she had hidden it and wept this miserably where I couldn't see. I could tell how much she must have been quietly enduring all along. Enough, I thought. This punishment was enough. If she no longer annoyed me, then I might as well do as I pleased. After more than 4 months, I stepped back into the place where she lived, and we picked up our old relationship. That night, I was wild, like a man long parched who's finally given sweet spring water. I couldn't hold myself back from her, again and again. In the days that followed, it was as if nothing had happened. The work still ran smoothly. Our life together still fit. But I noticed there was a difference. She had changed. She'd become cautious, obedient, careful, watchful over every word and every act. The change was tiny, hidden in small details you'd never catch unless you were paying attention. Before, she'd sometimes toss the coat she'd been wearing onto the sofa. Now she never did. Every corner of the house was tidy and clean. She liked little plush animals, and she used to keep a few lined up on the bedroom windowsill. At some point, without my noticing, she'd cleared them away. My taste in food is plain. She likes it spicy. She used to cook 3 or 4 dishes when she cooked. Now every dish on the table was a favorite of mine, and I never got to see her eating spicy food with her lips flushed red and happy. I remembered she liked a certain game show. If I went into the study at night, she'd watch TV in the living room, and sometimes when the door wasn't fully shut, I could hear her laughing out loud, freely. Now she didn't even watch TV anymore. The occasional playful teasing, the little jokes, all of it was completely gone. She had become even more rational and clear-eyed than before, fully aware of her place, and I found that I wasn't happy about it. I even felt a little irritated. This was something I had done, and I was angry with no one to be angry at. I'll admit my feelings for her were not the same as for the other girls. But no matter how much I liked being with her, I had never once thought of marrying her. From the time I was a boy, I knew exactly what I was supposed to do and what I was supposed to want. In our circle, marriage between families is an unwritten rule. I didn't fight it, and I was at the age where it was time. My family and I chose a partner, the daughter of a family long close to ours. We'd known each other since we were children and had no dislike between us. The two families began discussing the arrangements. Once it was settled, on an ordinary day after dinner, I mentioned to Lena, calmly, that we were ending things. Just as I'd predicted, she nodded and agreed, without a trace of clinging. She didn't even ask why. And in that moment, I found myself hoping she would be like the other women, that she would cry, cling, make demands of me. But she did none of it. She accepted every arrangement I made, except for one, going to work at my friend's company. Out of respect for my future wife, keeping her on as my special assistant wasn't appropriate, so I offered to introduce her to a friend's firm. She wouldn't go. She didn't look for other work either. Instead, she started her own media channel. I followed the account. It did well, and the number of followers climbed fast. I knew that with her character and her ability, there was nothing she couldn't do well. I don't know how, but my fiancé found out about her. Perhaps because Lena had stayed at my side so long, my ever-proud fiancé felt threatened. For the first time, she made a demand that Lena marry first before she would agree to marry me. I don't know what was in my head when I agreed. Maybe it was because I couldn't find any reason to go looking for Lena, and this was finally an excuse to see her. Or maybe I was startled that I couldn't stop thinking about her no matter what, like a smoker deciding to quit. That feeling of having lost control. Once she was married, she'd stop appearing in my mind, wouldn't she? I knew my demand was excessive, but she agreed all the same. And I knew that by agreeing to it, she would no longer owe me anything, and the two of us would truly have nothing more to do with each other. The man she'd marry was one I chose. Dean's character I trusted absolutely. He would never take advantage of her. There was one more hidden reason. I knew Dean's past. Because of his mother, he carried a deep aversion to women and was set on never marrying. So a fake marriage would have no effect on him at all, and Lena could slip free of it easily. Everyone would be comfortable. Dean owed me a debt, and he agreed without hesitation. But I never imagined that feelings are the most unpredictable thing in the world. Just as I never imagined I would fall in love with Lena Hartwell. The two of them, over time, developed feelings for each other, and their fake marriage turned into a real one. In truth, I should have seen it coming sooner. With a woman as fine as Lena at his side like that, what man could stop himself from loving her? Even I couldn't, could I? I understood that I loved her the moment they left the city. In that instant, I realized that in this life, I might never see her again, and my heart wrenched so hard the pain made me not want to go on living. Only then did I understand I had loved her for a very long time. That late awakening quickly turned into regret that spread through my whole body and pierced my heart. This loss of control didn't ease. It only grew worse. Every time I close my eyes, I miss her terribly. The craving has sunk into my bones and into my heart. This is the punishment for my arrogance, and I deserve it. Marrying a girl who matched me family for family had always been the plan of my life. Whether for my family's sake or my career's, it was the best choice. Marrying a woman from too different a background brings too many things you can't foresee, too many problems you can't predict. That was the judgment I'd formed from watching the marriages of the people around me, marriages that all ended in failure. Marriage had never played a large part in my life, and I'd never spent much thought on it. I never treated it as the center of anything. Marriage was simply that, on the surface nothing standing in the way. Two people able to coexist in peace without troubling each other. That was enough. And because of my family's circumstances and the life I'd lived, I'll admit I always looked at people through a lens of prejudice. I believed that a woman born into a great family and raised from childhood in a superior environment would at least carry a certain dignity, grace, and openness, and share my values. That was my minimum requirement in a marriage. It was only after I married that I learned a deceitful, boastful, self-important person has nothing to do with culture or family conditions. The longer I lived with my wife, the more clearly I saw her flaws. Strip away the label of a rich man's daughter, and she was no different from the women who had been with me before, and in some ways worse. With a powerful family behind her, she had the means to stand against me. She had faults I'd never seen in any woman before: overbearing, unreasonable, aggressive, even quarreling with me and dragging both families' elders in to judge between us. Only then did I discover that this woman I'd known since childhood had a hidden side no one knew. Without living with someone a long time, you never understand her true nature. This marriage made me regret, and by then, it was too late. I'd once believed marriage didn't matter to me. It was only after a marriage full of disappointment that I learned how much I actually longed for a good one. Countless times I thought if only the one I'd married had been Lena, how good that would have been. Lena, if you were my wife, how happy I would be. I'd had the chance once, and I destroyed it with my own two hands. And then it hit me that Lena had once liked me. I'd always known it. Her eyes, when she looked at me, always shone. You can't hide liking someone. I loved Lena this much, I thought. So if I went to her now and told her I regretted everything, she would give me a chance. Wouldn't she? Surely she would. She's always been soft-hearted and kind. I flew to the city where she lived. I meant to bring her home. I stood outside a low fence and watched Lena photographing her vegetable garden, Dean beside her with a shovel in his hand. I couldn't make out what they were saying to each other. I only saw her set down her camera, gently take a cloth, and wipe the sweat from Dean's forehead. She was smiling, radiant, the happiness plain in her eyes. For the first time, I felt the undeniable truth of what was between them. Seeing that, I could no longer go on lying to myself. She truly loved Dean, and there was no denying it. When she'd finished her work, Lena stood behind Dean and suddenly jumped onto his back, and he carried her easily toward the house, while she rested her head against his back and laughed softly. In that moment, I saw that she wasn't only a grown woman, but carried inside her an innocent, endearing, lively side, like a little girl. I was seeing a sweetness and a playfulness in her I had never known. And in that moment, pain and emptiness flooded through me. I understood that after everything I just witnessed, I had lost her forever, lost everything I had once hoped for and dreamed of. The loss is beyond words. and I know that everything between us has ended for good. I know that I have lost her forever. Thank you all for listening.